Hello, YouTube. This is Challenges Facing Game Designers with Tim Cain. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know if you're a game designer, guys, in chat, but I am, and I'll tell you what, it is a challenging job. Fucking challenging. So let's see what challenges Tim thinks there are and see if we have any agreement on this.
Today, I want to talk about what it's like to be a computer game designer.
It is not as fun as I thought it was when I was a kid and was like, I'm going to become a game designer. And I'm going to have all the ideas and I'm going to create the game in my head and then I can get people to make the game for me. Easy. And oddly enough, it turns out that that's actually not what it is.
I originally was going to say what it was like
Yeah,
to grow up to be
right.
a programmer and
Right.
an artist, even though the art one I pretty much watched, seeing what they go through. So I may do two more videos later on about programmers and artists, but I've got an awful lot, it turned out, in the design folder. So I thought I'd just limit it to, if you're thinking about being a game designer
Don't
or you're already in the industry as a game designer,
leave.
here are some things that are going to happen.
You're going to
Um,
get paid shit. You're going to be treated as if you are not a necessary component by people who don't know anything about game development. So if you have managers that are not in game dev, they're not going to understand what you do. They're not really going to see the point of having you because they don't see the tangible outcome of your work. Now, other people in game dev, they do like designers, but the people who are outside of that, they don't really understand why that you should exist. And because of that, you will get paid very, very shit. Designers are treated LAQC. What do you mean?
Probably the biggest thing that will annoy you is that
Oh yeah,
everybody thinks that they're a designer.
they do. They do. They do. They do. It's so true. It is so true that everybody thinks they're a designer, especially. I think it's really an issue with newer individuals to the industry. People who don't know what goes into game design think that they can be designers. People who have been in the industry for like 5 years, though, I don't tend to see that reaction. But it's 100% true with people who are fresh to the industry, and they think that game design is about ideas, and they think, oh, I have good ideas, which means that I'm a good designer. We've talked about this before, but game design is not about ideas, or it's not about having ideas. It's about filtering, blueprinting, and communicating ideas. You are a liaison between the team and the design pillars or the vision of the game. You're the one that is a gatekeeper for things that don't mesh well with the systems or what the game is trying to achieve. You bring in ideas from your team who, these might be good or bad, and then you see, okay, is this good? Is this bad? How can we achieve this? How much time is this roughly going to take? How do I blueprint this for the sound designers to know what they need to do, for the 3D artists, for the programmers? And in some cases, or in a lot of cases, you need to also blueprint this for the publishers to see, okay, this is what it's going to look like, this is how it's going to react. But yes, Tim's right. Everybody does think that they're a designer at some point early in their careers. I see it all the time. A lot of indie developers think, oh, well, I can do art or I can do programming, which means I can also do design. And if you're an indie dev, if you're on your own, you have to be, right? But if you are in a smaller team or smaller funded teams, like 5 or 6 people, I often see don't have a designer. And I gotta be honest, in a lot of cases, it shows. It shows that there is often a lack of cohesion, poor balance. Nobody ever stopped to ask, what do you do in this game? They're just like, oh, this is a cool idea, but then there's no cohesive gameplay loop. And you can tell that they didn't have a designer on board. I can fart, I can sound design. Yeah, pretty exactly.
And most of them, if not all of them, think they're a good designer,
Yes.
even though they have absolutely no idea what that process is like.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is everyone on the team and everybody outside the team will constantly be thinking of ideas of what should go in the game.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. That is a good thing. That's the point. You know, you don't want to be a designer that's so closed off to your team or to the community that you think that your word is law, right? Anybody can have good ideas. That's why we don't pay people in the industry to have ideas. There's no such thing as the idea man, and it's certainly not the game design team. Anybody can have good ideas. It's not the game designer's job to have ideas, though it certainly makes it a little bit easier, I think, to have good ideas as a game designer because you're constantly thinking about what the game is and what can fit into it. So usually your ideas are already subconsciously tested against the core loop or the game pillars. And other people in the team, you know, if you go up to like Jimmy, the 3D artist, who's literally just thinking about meshing all fucking day, he can have some great ideas for the game, but it's not his constant thought throughout the day of what is this game's pillars, what is this game trying to be, who's this game for, how do we achieve this vision. That's your job as the designer. That's what you exist to be, as a filter, a communicator.
And they think that by having an idea, they're a designer.
Yeah.
And that is so superficial of an opinion of what a designer does that I thought I'd walk you through it. I've heard people refer to these as seagull designers because they come in, poop something, and fly off, thinking my job is done. I've also heard seagull
It's
about
fucking
seagull
great.
producers.
Seagull
That could
designers.
be a whole video of seagull people.
Oh, I love that. I love that term.
But let me talk about
Never heard that
what
before.
tends to happen is someone will have an idea.
Yeah.
Hey, your game should do this.
True. So true. It should. I agree.
That's pretty much where it ends.
Yes.
Sometimes you can ask them, hey, what exactly do you mean? If it does this, won't this happen? How will you fix that? So if it does this, what about these other things?
I promise you, in most cases, it is useless to ask somebody those questions. Because, like he said, I think the term seagull designer works here. It's they come in, they drop a bombshell of an idea on you. And, I mean, in all honesty, it is kind of your job as a designer to determine what that is supposed to do or how that could fit. Although the only problem that I have with those kinds of people who drop ideas on me are the ones who think, oh, because I had this idea and because I think it's great, if you don't implement it, I'm upset, right? I don't mind if somebody's like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool in the game if we did this? And I think about it, I'm like, I'll think about it. I could see some issues here and here, but I'll think about it. And they're like, okay, like that's fine. That's totally normal. I love that. But it's the issue with I've only encountered this a couple times where people just think that all their ideas are gold, that they shit gold, everything they touch turns to gold, and it doesn't matter how much time or effort it might take to implement, it needs to be implemented. That's the problem. Every player plays a game as a game designer, they all have ideas how things should be. Well, every player who plays a game and thinks that a game designer is just there to concept ideas is absolutely wrong about what game design is.
How does it interact?
It's way more
those
boring
things?
than that.
I don't know. I just had an idea. Run with it. Happens all the time.
It does.
So let me tell you what the real process of design is.
Yeah.
Someone will have an idea.
Yeah, they will.
Hopefully not one of those seagull designers. And then it gets converted to a specification. This is where 90% of those wannabe designers fail.
Yep.
They don't know how to do this. They don't even know what it is. They really underestimate how hard it is. And if they do write one, it's usually way underspecified. But especially
generally meaning like to document, to actually consider it, to compare that to what is the loop, how would adding this change the gameplay, how would adding this affect it, is this needed for our target audience, is this desired for our target audience, how much time roughly is this going to take to add, everything, every little thing about a new idea, how it could impact the game. Sometimes it's small, right? Sometimes it's really small, like, oh, it'd be cool if the player could read books of lore in the game. Okay, well, this is optional, right? It doesn't really It's adding content. It's optional. It's a way for our writers and anyone who wants to add some lore to the game to expand it. Although there are still some things like, okay, does time pass while you're reading? Um, how many books are we generally expected to have? Because now we need translations for it. Will it be narrated? Now we need voiceover for that. All these things. So it's like the simplest implementation of it. Yeah, it's not too bad. But now you have to ask yourself, okay, well we've already gone over budget with our publisher on translations. We can ask them, but writing lore books, that's a lot of text. That all needs to be translated, and the more challenging the translation. So if you put in like old English, I remember with Darkest Dungeon, that was a huge challenge for the team, and something that I remember Tyler being very upset about because the translations just weren't accurately matching that. I hope he's okay with me saying that. But yeah, so there's a lot of problems with that. Budget, what budget? Exactly.
Specification for a design feature is fairly specifically scoped for that feature.
Yeah.
So it's not combat. It might be melee combat. It might be two-handed melee combat,
Mm-hmm.
and its interaction with skills and other abilities in the game and perks and items. Here's specific items that are used by this two-handed weapon skill, melee skill. It's already like, ooh, these are big.
Yeah, I could see his brain does the same thing that I do when you start, okay, we're going to add this to the game, and it's like, okay, well, it affects this, and you need to include all that in that documentation, that I call it like low level documentation. He calls it a spec doc. They are the same thing. It's how does this actually fit into the game? How does it work? What do we do? That can get broken up by other teams okay, well, you mentioned that there's going to be 5 swords. Okay, that means we need 5 icons. We need 5 3D models. They're all going to share the same animation set, but we still need a new animation set. You mentioned that one of them causes a specific sound when it swings, so that we need sounds for the 4 swords, and then we need a separate sound set for the other sword. Then we need a new data table or something. If we split up our data tables by weapon type for two-handed swords, now we need a new data table, so we'll have to schedule time to balance that. We have new text to put in the game, so now we need to have that translated. We need to have that written out. It just spirals out of control very, very easily, depending on what your game is. And you need to write that down as a designer, because the more accurate you make that, the better you can deliver that to the producer, who can work with the team leads to estimate time. That all ends up being money. And it's like, okay, well, this is going to take us 1 week, so we have some free time in a sprint here. We can do it. Oh, but it's needed before this date because it's part of this milestone. So it's like all this work for, I just want to have some two-handed swords.
Usually starts, as I've mentioned, with goals. What are you trying to do
Yes.
with this? What is your...
Thank God, Tim. Thank God, Tim. I have to pause it when he says goals, right? And that's my face when somebody doesn't do goals, okay? Every time you make a new feature, you add something new to the game, you need to ask yourself, really, what is this trying to do? How does this benefit the player's play experience? And if you can't answer that, and the problem that I see is so many game designers that I've worked with just are like, okay, let's make this feature because it's cool. Okay, but what purpose does it serve in this game? Why does this exist? And if it doesn't really exist to benefit the player in any way, or it doesn't match up with the game pillars in some way, then it's just kind of like, well, this is unneeded. You'll often see that a lot with games that are trying to be more than one thing, where you feel like, okay, well, this is like 2 separate games. You've created 2 separate games that they don't mesh well together, and they don't really have much interaction with each other. This is different though than like mini games. Like the Yakuza series is just mini game the game, and that's part of it. That's part of the core loop, is to jump into these subsections of like managing the boyfriend bar, or I think whatever it is, doing like crane mini games, like arcade games. But he's right. Just you need to actually answer, and I always do it in my low level documentation, or in his case the spec docs. is to specifically say what purpose does this feature serve? How does this benefit the player?
Intent. This is important so that later on you can talk about
Yes.
whether or not what you've written meets that intent, or if anyone wants to
Yes,
change it,
it's
does it
a
still meet the intent?
yeah, it's a goal, and you can compare. Okay, did the design that we wrote meet the goal that we intended to seek out, or oftentimes you'll see like user stories. As a player, I would like to be able to press the number keys and have the potions go into my hotbar. Right, that's a user story. That's something that benefits the player. And so we can say, okay, did the thing that we add meet, achieve that goal? Yes or no? And if it didn't, then we need to add on to something or to change something to make sure we meet that goal, or if it's still valid or not, right? Sorry that I'm pausing it. There's so much to unpack here.
Or you can talk about, I think your intent is wrong. I think we should be trying to do this, which
Yes.
is a completely different kind of conversation. Then the specification itself goes into great detail on that feature. How is it used in the game? How does it interact with other features in the game? What kind of implementation you need? This is where eventually this designer or another designer will come in with a formula or numbers, because eventually a programmer has to step in,
Yes.
read this document, understand what you're trying to do from the goals section, read the rest of it, and see what he's supposed to do, or she, and then implement it.
And yeah, that's crucial. It's crucial to note here that he's specifically speaking about like the low level documentation of how this interacts. That's when you add formulas. And it's important for game designers to know math in order to properly communicate with the programmers, because that's how it gets implemented, is through, usually in a lot of cases, that math. And if you can't properly discuss what you wanted to achieve, or how like how your XP curve should look like, if you just say, oh well, XP should get, you should require more XP as you level up. Okay, but then just put it into a formula, so that you can adjust that later. 1 plus 0 equals 2, exactly. The issue that I see oftentimes though is that designers who deliver the low level before they have the high level. We've talked about this before in some of our other videos, but I've seen apparently high level game design be delivered where it's basically this Excel spreadsheet of formulas that's supposed to mean something, even before the high level of the game is understood. Like we don't know the concept. There's no gameplay loop. There's no pillars here. You are delivering me an Excel spreadsheet and saying, here's the game design. No, it's not. Like this is needed, but it's needed way further down the line after we prototype and determine if this game is actually going to be fun. Like we have no vertical slice here. Numbers, what do they mean? Yeah. I've seen it and it just frustrates me because real game design is real high level game design is a bit chaotic, and there's no tangible outcome to it, right? And I think that it tricks people who don't know of game dev and design to thinking that the designer is just like concepting, which we kind of are. So what you can do is you can trick managers by giving them those Excel spreadsheets of numbers and making it look like, oh, well, I know spreadsheets because I have to budget, and so those numbers mean something tangible to me. And you've delivered this tangible set of numbers in a spreadsheet, so that must mean that you have the design figured out. And it's just not true in this case. It's very frustrating to me. That's why I don't think I will ever in the future work at a company where the people in management do not have some dev experience. Every time that I've worked with people who are in high level positions who have dev experience, it's just so smooth. It is so easy to communicate with them because they understand it. Show me the data, yeah. And it's like, well, high level game design. Well, it's like, okay, well, we have this we have this idea. Here's my one sheet. And they're like, okay, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, you would understand if you were a game dev.
And if you don't have formulas, if you don't have numbers, if you don't have links to all the other features that this feature interacts with, that programmer is going to be unhappy, and he's going to be in your office all the time.
Yes, and it wastes time is really what it comes down to. Now, I'll draw it. I'll draw it. Let me pull up Paint. Okay, we're gonna make an NFT here. Nobody screenshot this. That's illegal. This is how complete your design doc is. Like how many things does it address? Okay. And this is between, let's just say 0 and 100% of the things it needs to complete. Now here is the time it takes to complete that document. And it is exponential in my opinion. It is kind of like this. You want to aim reasonably. Obviously, you want to try to get 100%. You always want to try to get it. You will never get to 100% on your first try. You want to hit about in here. I know that, okay, that's a little bit messed up. You want to aim at about here. You want to optimize the amount of time it takes to make your document, try to get it as near to 100%, but then take it to the teams and say, okay, how is this looking so far? Or have another designer review it, somebody with a fresh mind who can say, oh, you're clearly missing this section. And then as you receive feedback, you'll want to shore up that document and put some additional things in when a programmer comes to you and says, hey, this section in your document is just not, it's really confusing to read. It's like, okay, so then break it down even more, explain it a bit better, put in some more diagrams, and then you'll get it closer to that 100% mark, which is your goal. Because if you spend this much time doing it, if you get up to here, you're wasting a lot of people's time where it's like, okay, just try to get in as much as you can, take it to the teams, have a talk about it, do a planning session, and then shore it up as needed. If you do it too little, like he said, you're going to have programmers breathing down your neck because they just don't understand what they need to do. They don't understand how it should work. A proper design doc does not look like bullet points of, okay, we have a sniper class, we have a berserker class, and the sniper has a rifle, and that does 10 damage. Okay, the berserker, he's got a sword, and that does 8 damage. And the rifle also has a cooldown of 3 seconds before it can be shot. The sword has a cooldown of 2 seconds before it can be swung again. I promise you, if you take this to a programmer, they are in their right to quit at that point. If you say, yeah, I'm a designer and here's my design for our game. Here's our classes, here's the weapons, and here's like damage and cooldown. Well, how does this fucking work? What kind of damage? Is this mitigated by any armor? There's a cooldown here. Is it paused when you do certain things? Is there any way to skip this? Anything that resets this? Like, this doesn't answer anything. It's like, okay, but what do these classes mean? Like, this is nothing about the game. Honestly, if you want to say, if you're doing high level design, you can say, okay, we have classes in our game. And a couple of example classes are the sniper, the berserker, and then just write a little bit of like talk about them. Like, the sniper class is equipped with a rifle that shoots at long range, but has, does high damage, but has a slow reload speed. Okay, because reading that as a programmer actually gives you a bit of a better understanding, at least on the high level, for prototyping that class, of what it's supposed to do. It's like, okay, it's a rifle, shoots at long range, high damage, slow reload speed. I get that. And that's more important than the numbers, which are balance. Okay, tell the programmer what it does. If the numbers are supposed to be balanced by designers, I promise you that the programmer doesn't give a shit about the numbers in that case. Just tell them, oh, well, damage should be a integer in this case. Reload speed should be a float because it's time, right? So time, we want to measure it in seconds. That way, then at least they're like, okay, I can set it this way. I'll just put in some random numbers to test it when I'm implementing it, and then you can balance it later. Perfect, done, easy game.
Similarly, an artist, usually the lead artist, and then they assign it, looks at these and goes, oh, this feature is going to need this kind of user interface or this kind of art for an item or an
Mm-hmm.
armor or an animation or a prop. So all these people get involved in that specification stage. It can take a while to do this.
Yes.
And usually one of those seagull designers, they're long gone. Then a programmer will actually get assigned this and try to implement it. They will come by whoever wrote the specification, they will be in your office a lot.
Yes.
We'll go back and forth. Things may have to be changed. When they go to implement it, they may discover that there are things in the implementation that don't fit with things that are already done. So then you have to decide, is this worth changing those existing things? That might get a producer involved. We don't have time to make these changes.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I mean, I'm not gonna like contradict him. He's been in this wheelhouse more than I have, but everything he's saying is exactly my experience too, where that's kind of the fun of it though for me, is where I write the document. The document takes a while. It's kind of fucking boring, and you're just sitting there thinking. And that's another thing that managers who don't know game dev will look at designers and think, oh, he's not getting any work done. Because literally, me, for when I'm thinking about design and writing a document, it's just like, we could do that. Okay, yeah. Okay, there's a note to add, and that's me for like 3 days. It's just thinking. It's like, how does this fit? What do I need to think about? How does this interact with other systems? And then I actually start writing the document. But for a lot of times, it's just me like just thinking and just sitting, thinking, having talks with some other people. Just like, if we did this with this system, would that cause any problems? No, I'd be fine. It's like, okay, we can do that then, you know. And he's right. You have to go to your UI designer and you'll have to think, okay, can you make me a mock-up based off of this system? It's like, okay, I'll make a mock-up. UI designer comes back. You're like, can you tweak it a little bit here? What do you recommend? And then you put that UI mock-up into the document too. Then he's right. You get assigned a programmer or a couple programmers. They're just going to be sitting down. They're like, okay, tell me every fucking thing about this. Okay, I read the document, hopefully, if they're good programmers. Now tell me anything else. How does this work? They'll come to you with questions. You'll be like, I didn't think about that. Okay, let me add that to the document here and tell me how that looks. Okay, that looks good. Or they're like, I looked at the mock-up and the mock-up has some problems. UI designer says, okay, well, from my talk with the designer, that's going to cause a problem with this and this system. And it's like, okay, so it's constant iteration and work, and it's a real challenge. It is a very, very challenging discipline of game development, especially because you are concepting things that have not been made, that have not been like tested in some cases. You don't know if they'll work. You don't even know if players will like it yet. That is just, you have to take an educated stab in the dark based on experience, based on playing other games, based on your own knowledge of the industry, which is why game designers, if you don't play games, if I ask you what games are you playing and I don't get a sense that you are actively a gamer, I certainly won't work with you. There's just no chance in hell will I work with you because you don't demonstrate a desire to keep up to date with recent design trends and with recent market trends. Like, look, a good example, Star Wars Outlaws is the same old design that Ubisoft has been using for like a decade now. And if you had pitched that to me 10 years ago as a game, like, oh, this game is going to be like Far Cry 3, with these towers and points of interest and shit like that, 10 years ago, I might say, okay, yeah, people like Far Cry, it's popular right now. Sure, we can do something like that. You pitch that design to me now, I'm going to be like, get the fuck out of my office. You clearly do not demonstrate an understanding of that formula and if it's enjoyed by players nowadays.
Or maybe those other things are already causing problems. So he's like, oh, I'm so glad. Let's remove that. That is causing issues. Or let's change it. Then it gets implemented. Usually, when the programmer's implementing it, they discover art that will be needed for implementation. Sometimes that art is made right then. Sometimes, if the artists are busy, it's made later. So the feature is brought as
Placeholders.
close to finish as it
Yeah,
can,
yeah.
gets blocked on art. An artist will eventually go in and make the art needed for it. It gets unblocked, usually goes back to the programmer who finishes it up. Then it goes to QA. I mean, we're not nearly done with the thing. It goes into QA, where QA, as is their job, will bang on it as hard as they can. And
You'll notice if you're working with somebody who's in QA, if the first thing they do when they start up your game is just mash the keyboard and trying to break your game. And usually they will break your game within 10 seconds and then tell you, oh, there's a bug, and then they're just going to close it. And it's really frustrating, but somebody who's really good at QA will be up in your shit as a designer all the time. You should be up in QA shit all the time, because they will be asking you, is this, some bugs are really easy, like a clipping, like an art bug, right? Like this mesh clips into here, or this tree is floating. But for game design related things, they're just going to be constantly verifying, like, hey, I read the document, this kind of looks weird, here's a video, is this working as intended, is this working as intended? And you need to then be in constant contact with them too, on either via documents by saying, hey, I updated the document, read this section, and that's how we expect this to work now. Or to say, look, I changed this to work this way, so if there are any bugs related to this, can you retest those? QA and design, they do have a lot in common, where they're just up in everybody's shit all the time to make sure things are working as intended. I love working with QA. QA, however, is also a very criminally underpaid job in the industry. You would think that they would understand that design and QA are pretty damn needed for games, especially nowadays. Apparently not.
try to break that feature. Let me tell you, they are very successful at doing that.
Oh, yes, they are.
And also, I've watched other producers get mad at QA for finding these problems. And it could be a bug in the implementation, or it
I've
could
seen
just
that
be a
too.
problem with the design itself.
Yeah.
And I witnessed producers yell at QA people for finding these things. It blew my mind.
Yeah,
and I called a few of them out on it. I'm like, why are you yelling at this person? You should be happy they found it before.
Their job is to find bugs and to report them so that the game is stable, so that players playing the game don't find those bugs too and then give you a negative review because your game is buggy. You should be, I've been frustrated with QA before, where it's like, can you guys just play the game like a normal player? But it's more of like exasperated, kind of a humorous response, where it's like, okay, I'll fix the bug, but can you normally play the game like 95% of the people will play it? Just to tell me if the thing that I need tested is working or not. Then you can go ahead and you can keep mashing the keyboard.
Shipped. So when they found this bug, it goes back into that iterative implementation specification cycle, because it may be they found a problem with the design itself, which means it needs to be respect. They may find a bug in the implementation, which means it needs to be.
Don't sleep on what he just said, by the way. A bug in design that needs to be respect is fucking scary. Because again, most things in the game start with design. And if your high-level design of your game is fucked up in some way, that trickles down into the low-level design. If it trickles down into that, it affects art, it can affect programming, UI, sound, everything. So the more problems that you can resolve before your feature or whatever gets to proper production and implementation, the more time you'll save down the line. That's why it takes so much time to think. That is why I'm often called a slow designer, but the reason is because I try to shore up those problems to save time in like refactoring. Like, okay, let's think very carefully about whether or not this system, how it's going to work and things like that. That way we don't have what I call holes in design, like you've created a high-level design hole. That's the scariest, because now you're going to have a problem. You're going to go down to thinking, okay, how should this system interact with this other system? And you're like, oh shit, they can't interact because I designed them poorly. Well, now I've wasted a week time writing this document that's supposed to be due tomorrow. Do I fix the other system? Do we let the bug sit there? Nah, you fucked up. You fucked up with your high level, and then that trickles down. Bad. Bad, bad, bad. Don't let that happen.
Recoded.
It's
Or
gonna happen, but don't let it
this
happen.
art doesn't loop, like maybe it's or interrupt correctly, maybe it's a reloading thing and it doesn't interrupt correctly,
Yeah.
or it needs to loop a few times because this gun has a lot more ammo, so that it shows reloading and the original art doesn't loop. It could be a lot.
You get that with like Borderlands, and they just kind of let that bug exist. So you'll have like a gun that the animation loads 6 bullets, but then you'll have a modifier on it that increases your magazine capacity. So it's like you're loading 6 bullets, but then you have 12 in the gun. I think in some cases like that, players don't give a shit. Like it's kind of funny if you notice it, but it's like who cares? It's a cosmetic bug, as I call it, where it doesn't interrupt gameplay, it doesn't cause any progression blockers. It's a bug that it just can at most break immersion.
A lot of things, and it goes to different people, which is why, by the way, producers are so great because they monitor this whole process and keep people from going
Yes.
insane. So finally it's done and in the game, and the two things you now as the designer will encounter: one, if this original idea came from a Seagull designer, they will take 100% credit for it, even though they were not involved in the 99% of the Herculean effort required to get
Let
this
him
thing
finish with this, then I'll say it, something.
also. And this is why I took a lot of notes, and still with my notes, there are disagreements. When that feature finally goes out and people go, I love blah in this game, I love feature X. Who's responsible for feature X? Is it the person who had the high level idea? Is it the person who wrote that very detailed specification that everybody read and worked off of?
Team.
Is it the person who actually coded it? Is it the person who did the art for it? And maybe why people like it so much is like, oh my God, that looks so cool.
My answer to this before he gives his is even if it was one of those Seagull designers, I try to give credit for the idea to the person who had the idea. Always. There's a very, very good reason that I do this. I will say, oh, that feature, that was the idea of person X in programming. Really fucking awesome. The reason I do that is because it rewards that person for having that idea, and it makes them more likely to come to me to share ideas because it's kind of like, oh, I get some recognition, right? Recognition is important in game dev. They'll also feel like I'm not an egotistical designer taking credit for things that weren't mine. It'll make them feel like they are more a part of the game's development, like things that they may not be a designer, but they still can contribute in a way that is visible for the players. There's a lot of reasons to give credit, even if they're a Seagull designer. However, he is right that whose idea, who's responsible for that success? The answer is simple: the team. Even if it was something that art never touched, it's the team that gets to be rewarded with success. You can say, well, the team did an amazing job implementing this. Programmers were great on this. We had a lot of design meetings that were they just worked. And the sound design cooked up some amazing sounds. Take the time to reward the team for the things that they did well. Don't you as a designer are absolutely going to be the one that if a game is well designed, you're going to be in that spotlight, for better or worse. But if the game is bad, you're also in the spotlight. But if you're in the spotlight, that doesn't mean that you are the one that needs to be. You're not the one that needs to be absorbing the light. Let's put it that way. Maybe if I can use the spotlight as a metaphor here. Use that time to thank the team, to reward the team, to prop the team up if you have it, because you are not, as a designer, you are not the solo responsible person for this game's success. You are just one cog in the machine, and even though your cog is an important part, it does not mean that your cog is any more important than other people's parts. Reward them. That's it. I wish people rewarded me for ideas. I've helped a lot of streamers and moved on because I didn't feel appreciated but felt like a stepping stone. Yeah, I think that happens a lot in games, and I think that there are times where you can tell if the developer is the kind of individual who is just, oh, thank you for the idea. Goodbye. That was our interaction. And the developers who try to give response, try to reward that by saying, "Oh yeah, I don't remember who was in chat, but somebody in chat, mentioned this, and I thought it was a great idea, and we implemented it and it worked." Stay away from such people. I do too. I think that I've worked with designers who try to just take responsibility. They think that they're the director, and because they see themselves as the director, they are the only ones responsible for the success, and the people underneath them are like just, I don't know, slaves or workers. I had one person that I worked call them his minions. Yeah, bad mentality. I agree. I agree. When we source ideas from chat, I try my best to put names next to people. A lot of ideas from like Lazy Fangs. My mom had an idea. Dragon King Gamer, my plot armor. That way, I can look back and say, maybe that person appears in chat again, and we're implementing that person's idea, and it's like, yeah, dude, we're implementing your idea, and it's looking good so far. Or if that person maybe had, if I didn't copy enough data down, I can go and find that person and say, hey, I'm looking at implementing the idea you had. Can you tell me a bit more of what you meant by it, if you remember? I don't know. I feel like anybody can have good ideas, and we should reward people for those ideas. And having an idea is just one small section of the implementation. Most of the work that goes into making a game is the implementation of ideas, not having the ideas. Ideas are worth nothing.
Is it QA who found all the problems done, all of them by the previous people,
It's all of
and
these
got it
people.
working right? So whose feature is that?
The teams.
This is why frequently, I could do a whole video on that. I could probably do a whole video about how I could do whole videos. But this is why sometimes I'll go, oh, that was Bob's idea. That was Mary's idea. And sure enough, I'll get an email or a private DM and they'll go, that actually was this person's. And we talk about it and we find out, sometimes we find out we're both wrong. It was actually somebody else's.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm definitely going to do it. I will do a whole video about how companions came out in Fallout, and you can fight over who should have credit for that. But anyway, that is a good example of what you will go through as a designer. And then let me give you some idea, because the whole thing started with those seagull designers that come by and poop something on your desk and then they fly away. Let me go over some things that got pooped on my desk for reals. So
Right.
years ago,
Let's
when
get into it.
MMOs were first getting started, MMOs really came out in the late 90s. This was probably early 2000s. It could have been 99, but I think it was 2000. Sierra dropped something off at my desk. It was a specification of another company doing another game that looked like it was going to be an MMO. It was online multiplayer.
Classic, by the way.
They wanted it to have
If
permanent.
if a publisher knows that you're suckling at their teat, they will do this. They will just drop off a game idea that was delivered, either somebody in the company had it, and they wrote up like some half-assed bullshit documentation, or they asked some student who they could pay $200 to put some assets into Unreal Engine over the course of 2 days, and they're like, yeah, what do you guys think of this? Can you finish this? And it's like, there's nothing here. There's absolutely nothing here. They're like, well, yeah, but we want you to finish this. We'll pay you for it. And it is like that. It's like they're just shitting on your desk. The ideas usually aren't that great. Sometimes they're okay, but there's nothing behind it. It's literally just it would be cool if there was a game that did this. That's the pretty much the extent of the work that's been done. And it's like, okay, well, this is nothing, because this is, anybody in our company could have had something like this. 2 days ago, when I said I had playtester tell me bugs, I made an Excel sheet. Yeah. Posted it with the name of the people who report the bugs, and we'll add their name in game credits. I love that idea. I'm gonna go play Forza. Yeah, go have fun with Forza. But yeah, I agree. I think that's really cool, and that rewards the community for coming forward and taking the time to report bugs, which I like.
Depth. Let me describe what they thought was a cool feature. You'd log into their server,
Yeah,
you'd make a character,
yeah.
and you'd go out in the world. You'd have fights, you'd talk to people, you'd quest, you'd craft, and all this. But if you ever died, you're dead. Boom, back to the character generator.
That's like a Reddit tier idea. And I'm not saying that you can't make an MMO like that, but it is a Reddit tier idea of, oh, game hardcore, that means game fun, which means if we make game more hardcore, that means more fun. Because that's how it works. If you implement more of the thing that is fun, that means that the game is more fun. Yeah, yep, yep. And an MMO RPG where your character, if they die, they just die forever. Yeah, that's kind of fucking stupid. That it's a niche. It's such a niche idea that it's not a bad thing to include in an MMORPG, but it's something that only a tiny, 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 tiny subset of players will actually find enjoyable and will actually engage with at any given time. So, is it worth implementing over other things? No. Is it worth implementing maybe at some point down the line where you can do that and there's enough desire for it? Sure.
Own your character, his items, and all that. They're just, when something dies, whoever kills them can loot them. So it's gone. They thought this was a good idea. Now, to put this in context, lots of games do this idea of permanent death.
Yes.
Usually they're single player. You're playing at home, and the way they work is, you say, I want to play this mode. Temple had this, but
Yeah,
it's
an
We call
opt-in.
it Iron Man mode. You'd say, I want to play Iron Man mode. It would go, okay. When you save, it takes you back to the main menu. You don't get to keep playing. When you load an Iron Man, excuse me, when you load an Iron Man save game, it deletes it after it's loaded. So there is no save games to go back to. This is an interesting way to play because it's the way original D&D tabletop was played. You played, and if you died and no one could raise you, you were done.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting way to play a single player game. I don't think that's a good way to play an MMO.
Well, no, there's a lot of problems with that could occur with MMOs, and it's also the case where you need to ask yourself. I talk about it a lot, but like one of the worst things you can do as a designer is disrespect a player's time, right? Because especially nowadays, it's way more true than it used to be. Back in the '90s, back in the early 2000s with games where you didn't have like a shit ton of games to play. So if a game was taking up a couple hundred hours of your playtime, that was the way that it was, right? That was the game. Nowadays, if you say we're making a game where you have 200 hours of playtime, I think there are more players than not who would be like, I just want to play the game and like move on. Like there's other games I want to play. So disrespecting a player's time is something that you need to consider. Not saying that Iron Man mode or like this or permanent death is disrespecting the player's time, but you need to communicate that and say, okay, is our game about this? Is it a roguelike? Okay, well, players need to know that when they play the game. Is this an optional mode? So it's not part of the default. Players need to know this, right? XCOM has it. Most players in XCOM don't use the permanent death mode, but it's there for some players who do want that. They choose it so they don't feel like their time is being disrespected. But players can also feel that their time is disrespected when they feel like the game has put them in a bad situation that they didn't have a chance to get out of, right? Like with RNG. And Darkest Dungeon had a lot of this, where a lot of times the game felt like the RNG was overly punishing, that you were put in a bad situation that you couldn't anticipate and that you can't really get out of, and the game didn't really let up. Baldur's Gate 3, for one of the things that it did, which was oh god, what do they call it? It was like something with the dice rolling, where after a string of failures or of like really low rolls, it would give you a small boost in the background. And if you had too many, I think if you had too many high rolls, it would also do the same thing in reverse. But I think it was just in the negative direction, right? As a bit of a way to just give you a bit of like favor. And I think that works, especially for the audience. But again, that just comes down to, what is the audience that you're making your game for? Is it a hardcore audience that wants permadeath? Okay, then do it. Is it a casual audience that doesn't want permadeath, that doesn't, wants to save scum in order to get the ending that they want? Then just allow that, right? I don't know. It's a whole topic I could go into for like an hour, but yeah, it's one of those things.
for a lot of reasons. The main one, which is you can sometimes die and it was completely not your fault. In a single player game, if you die, ultimately you probably did something you shouldn't have. But in an MMO, you might die for all kinds of reasons.
Yes.
You might die
Disconnect.
because somebody in your party didn't taunt the creature off of you because that's their job as a tank, or your healer didn't heal
I
you.
mean, and this happens in old school RuneScape, right? You have hardcore Iron Man modes where you have a special status. And if you die as a hardcore Iron Man, you become a regular Iron Man. And you can just die to a disconnect. Like your internet might just fuck up. And it's like you're gone. Thankfully if that happens in a single player game and your game crashes or your power goes out, your save isn't fucked up. You just have to restart from the last save as your hardcore character, right? Obviously, that's a way to get around it, but it's a single player game. Who gives a shit?
That was their job's healing, or the group decided to go into a dungeon and you're like, this is way over our level, and they convince you it's not. The problem with that is once it becomes in the player's mind not their fault that they died, it's really hard to have that kind of mode.
He's right.
Plus, in an MMO, especially with a lot of other ones out there that don't have this, that's a problem. So I wrote back and said, I think this is an issue, along with a bunch of other things I saw as an issue. Like some races were restricted to people who had proven themselves fans of the game. So you had to put in like 100 hours or get a character up to max level cap before you were allowed to play other races. Now,
That's really dumb. That's really dumb. Yeah, you have to prove that you're a fan of the game by writing a 5-paragraph essay and posting it on our forums, and then we can unlock the dragon race for you to play.
nowadays, this is called unlock, but the way they presented it was as, unless you prove that you're a fan of this game, yeah, you don't get to be this.
It's so stupid.
Another design idea that got pooped on my desk one day was, hey, we're trying to sand off the rough edges of the game.
Yeah.
We should get rid of encumbrance. Nobody likes encumbrance. I should be able to pick up anything I want and not be forced to move slowly or not fast travel. I just want to be able to pick up everything I want.
Cascading problems. It's a waterfall of problems when you remove things that seem so simple, like, oh, just remove this feature. Well, it's like, okay, well, now the entire balance of the game is built around encumbrance, around you not being able to pick up all the items, only being able to obtain a certain amount of gold, let's just say per hour, as the designers have kind of been able to think about it. So many cascading problems because of encumbrance. Well, now save files can be bloated because you can have so many things, which means that loading and saving times are going to be lengthened, potentially causing hitches. It's cascading problems when you sometimes remove those features that seem so simple to remove, but have so many things are dependent on that.
And I was like, okay, but another problem we're already having with this game is your inventory gets too big.
Yes.
And it's hard to manage your inventory when there's hundreds of items in it.
That too.
Won't this make it worse? Won't that make that a lot worse? Oh yeah, I didn't think of that, but we've got to solve that anyway. So let's just roll it in with that. And I'm like, yeah, but encumbrance kind of solves that by saying we know the maximum of what you're going to carry, except ammo, which we made weightless, but there's only so many ammos and they stack, which led to a whole other conversation about how that same person wanted us to get rid of ammo. In other words, ranged weapons. Every ranged weapon had an infinite firing capacity. Now, while I thought infinite ammo on a particular weapon drop would be an interesting, advantage. Here's a weapon. It may not be that great, but it's got infinite ammo. But once everything has infinite ammo, you now have to balance them in a different way.
This is a constant. There's a constant debate that goes around with like Mass Effect 1 versus Mass Effect 2 and 3, where in Mass Effect 1 you had the heat clips or the heat sinks, and it's basically every gun created a different amount of heat, and that was how they balanced ammo, but you didn't have ammo pickups. Mass Effect 2 and 3, you had like heat clips, right? Which, let's just say, it was essentially ammo. It was lore friendly ammo. And a lot of people didn't like that. But what they need to realize is that they're trying to obtain a different balance in this, where if you have infinite ammo, there isn't always a massive need to switch weapons, especially if your game's combat is done in a way where there aren't enough changes in the combat to warrant switching between like a long range and a close range weapon, especially if weapons don't have much recoil or don't have a very large spread or are all pretty accurate. And I think that Mass Effect 1 is a good example of a game that I think it works. The infinite ammo is okay, but going into more of the action arcadey combat of 2 and 3, I prefer having ammo, and I think that it serves the game well. Having to switch weapons, having to make sure that you can't just equip all of the strongest weapons on you and blow through things without much thought. I get that it's contentious and that some people don't like it for whatever reason, but I think it works. It's just he's right. You need to balance it. It changes the balance when you go from infinite ammo to having ammo, and you have to ask yourself, okay, well, would The Last of Us 1 still feel the same if you had infinite ammo? No, because resource management is a core part of the game. It's you're in an apocalypse, you have limited resources. You need to choose, well, I have 6 bullets. Do I use one right now to dispatch of one of these 3 enemies, or do I find a way to dispatch of these enemies in a more stealthy, longer, it requires more playtime. I have to sneak around and observe routes, lure them, but I can save my ammo for something that is probably more necessary than this encounter.
Plus, that was kind of the advantage of melee weapons. They never run out of ammo.
Yeah.
Now, ranged weapons never run out of ammo. They both can be used infinitely. Melee weapons don't even become the ranged character's fallback. Oh, I'm completely out of ammo. At least I can stab them with this knife. I asked this person how they would change the existing specifications of those other features, and they basically said, well, that's your job. And I'm like, no. My job is to get my stuff in the game.
Oh, fuck.
If you want this in the game, you're going to explain to me that other stuff. They didn't. That stuff wasn't put in the game.
Yeah.
And then the last story is I actually worked with a designer who thought and told me that a designer's job is to kill the player. And he
hold on. Hold on. What did he mean by this?
And he meant it. He thought his goal as a designer, and he based this off his goal as a DM, was this notion that you tried to kill the player.
I'm struggling to figure out any way that this could have been meant in a good way. Okay, it would be for an RPG game, because we know Tim Cain, right? He works in RPG games. Did the guy maybe mean that the goal is to try and kill the player? So was he like saying in a really stupid way to make players fear death, and that adrenaline, those emotions that you go through on the brink of dying and then succeeding is something that is positive, right? Because that is positive, right? You barely come out of the scrap alive. You put your all into it. You succeeded. That feels good. I agree. But just simply meaning that your goal as a designer is to kill the player, I would ask, okay, well, how much game design experience do you have? And if they say anything other than none, I'm scared. Okay? Because any any designer who says that to me, I have the exact same faces as Tim with if I heard that. It would be like this mix of concern and flabbergasted, like incredulity of, did that really just come out of your mouth? Your goal as a designer is to kill the player. No, your goal as a designer is to make an entertaining game. That doesn't necessarily mean fun, right? Because like I said, Last of Us, great game. Opening scene, 15 minutes, right? Would you describe the opening scene with spoilers, by the way, where Joel's daughter is getting gunned down as fun? No, but it is entertaining. It's creating these emotions in you. You know, made a lot of people cry. I still tear up a little when I see that because it's fucking sad and it's very well made. I'm entertained. I'm not necessarily having fun because it's, I'm crying my ass off, but it is entertaining. So, for me, it's creating experiences, creating emotions that combined create that entertainment. That is my job as a designer for the player. For developers, my job as a designer is to communicate effectively, to blueprint ideas, to make them feel as if they are contributing to the game, to be a part of that team that has that responsibility of creating those end user experiences. But holy shit, that is really fucking funny that Tim had that. I feel bad for him.
Was this notion that you tried to kill the player? I asked him, I'm like, do you really mean challenge?
Yes, exactly.
With really good combat.
Yeah.
Dialogues that can lead to being attacked and stealth where you get caught. And he said, no, you're trying to kill the player. That's your goal. That's everything you write, every feature. The main goal is how could this end up killing the player? That was an interesting discussion because I don't agree with it.
That's so
I
fucking
could see
funny.
how you could make a game that way. That wasn't my goal.
You could make a game.
He got really upset and he said, well, if that's not the goal, what is your goal? And I was like, to entertain the player?
Exactly, it's to entertain, right? It's like fun. Fun is a very specific word, right? I think that a lot of people think, oh, the job as a game designer is to make a fun game. It's not exactly. I think entertaining is a more accurate word. Tim's right. I mean, obviously he's right. He's a fucking beast.
My goal in every game is that the person playing should have fun. I know that's nebulous, but
Yes,
that's why you write goals at the top.
Yep.
Because they are supporting ultimately a top level goal, in which case it was for me to have fun. This is why sometimes my games aren't balanced. I'm not as focused on balance as I am on fun. If people can find a way to make it really easy to kill some monster or to make a build that's more powerful than another build, I'm usually okay with that.
I do the same thing. The gate that I put is that, and Helldivers 2 made this mistake, right? It depends on how much work. For me, it depends on how much work the player has put in to break the game. If the player can just do one thing, and it's really easy to do this, and it's really easy to replicate it, and it just breaks the balance of the game, that's a problem. If the player min-maxes and they put in a lot of strategic effort into choosing the right perks, finding the right gear, and choosing the right companions to break the game, good. That's your goal. You have successfully made a good build. You have successfully made the game easy because you put in the time, the strategy, the effort to make the game easy. Congratulations, player. You have succeeded. I'm not gonna balance that. You've broken the game. Good for you. Have fun.
The only thing I don't like is if you can make a build that can't finish. I don't like that.
That's a good point,
but
too.
I'd also say that easily falls under the rule of that's not fun. If you make a build and 70% of the way through a game, you find out I can't complete the game with this character I made. That's not fun. That is the
Caveat, or at least retort, counter argument, Tim. If you ever see this, and I don't think you will, but if you ever do, is it okay then for the player to purposefully try to make a build that can complete the game? Do you still want the player to be able to complete the game that way? Or do you think that there is some element of player input and thought that is required? Like, do you think the player has to put in some level of effort to complete the game doing this? I think you'd probably answer that any build should be able to complete the game. It'll just be harder, and I could agree with that. I think that's okay in cases of RPGs. I think Josh Strife Hayes is a good example. Recently, he played New Vegas as the Milkman build, which was every time he leveled up, he put one skill point into every skill. Obviously, if you've played that game, you'll notice that that's not the greatest way to play the game, but it is still possible to finish the game like that. It's just kind of dumb. It was funny, it was entertaining, and it did end up working. So good for him.
Definition of not fun. So I tried to convince him that killing the player was not his number one priority.
Yeah.
But I did tell him I look forward to playing a game that you eventually direct where that is your number one goal.
Yeah, I mean, because, and Tim's right, it's because there is no bad game design, there's no good game design. It's all dependent on this massive amount of factors that as a designer you will have to think about. Your goal is killing the player. Absolutely, it can work. It can 100% work. Depends on the game. Depends on the game, depends on the market, depends on how you approach it. It can work.
So I hope I didn't discourage anyone from ever wanting to be a designer, but that is what you're up against as a designer. And I think the other roles don't have that notion that many people have that I could do your job. I don't see people going up to programmers going, yeah, I could code that better than you. I certainly don't see people going up to artists and saying, I could easily make a creature that animates better than that, or I could model something better than that. Here, move aside, let me do it.
He's right about this, by the way.
Never happened. I've never seen that happen. I've seen that happen in design many, many, many times.
Yes.
So if you want to be a designer, be aware. Don't let that discourage you. Just go in knowing that that's going to happen.
Great video. I mean, he's 100% right about this. Wait for the video where Tim crosses his arms and looks smugly at the camera like a YouTuber. He's right. I also have not witnessed that. I think because design, he used the word nebulous, and I think design I think that's a great word to use with game design. Game design is nebulous. I talk with programmers who they just genuinely don't know really what goes into game design. They're not doing it in like a smug way. Kozin, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the stream. Hope you're having a nice Thursday. I've met to, I work with like programmers who they just don't get it. And I really like talking with them about it because they just seem interested in, well, I don't get why it's tough. Explain to me. Run me through the methods of what makes game design difficult. And I think that they end up learning a lot. Thank you, Mr. Friend. Thank you for the follow as well, and welcome. How you doing today? So there was a good example back, I think like a half a year ago, with a friend of mine who is just the purest, most low-level tech programmer ever. And I love him. He's great. But he does not understand game design. And that's okay. So he was arguing that he just didn't understand why Vampire Survivors was popular. He just doesn't get it. He looks at it and he says, this game is simple. Like, I don't get why it's so fun. Like, you just go around, you kill things, and you level up, and then you collect. It's like he doesn't get it. And as a game designer, I'm like, well, it's clear why it's popular. It's clear why it's successful. Is because it's an addictive gameplay loop. It's an addictive gameplay loop with a game that's easy to get into, that is easy to understand. The requirements to run it and figure out how to play are simple, and the core loop is completable within a very short amount of, like, it's a very fast gameplay loop. And yes, Monty Rob, yes, the price tag is appealing. Doing fine from California. Hey, I've been to California a couple times. San Fran. Not the greatest city. But maybe some other parts of California are pretty great. Beautiful state, though. What was I saying? So yeah, I was explaining this and he just didn't get it. And at the end of the day, you know what? It's like, that's fine. Like, that's exactly why I exist in my job, why I do game design. And his job as a tech artist, building bridges between like Houdini and Unreal Engine, I can't do that shit. But the thing is, he isn't pretending to know how to do design. He just doesn't get it. Tim, I think, brings up a good point where there are these designers in the industry or people who think that they can do design that don't really understand what it takes to do game design. And it is kind of condescending sometimes where it's like, well, just do it. Just do it this way. It'll make the game more fun. And it's like, well, no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. Here's the 10 reasons why. And I know you don't believe me because you're like, well, we need to prototype it. It's like, well, okay, we can. But I'm telling you, because of this reason, this reason, this reason, this game that's been out, this game that's coming out, here are the Twitch, here's Twitch chat of people who like this game responding to it negatively. Here's a bunch of Steam reviews that say that it doesn't work because of these reasons. And all of my experience trying to show you that this is probably 95% not going to work. It's nebulous, is what it is. It's a nebulous aspect of game development that relies a lot on like the trust me bro factor. Here's why I don't think it's going to work for this game. But that doesn't mean that it's bad design. It just means that it doesn't fit with this game. Ooh, what a long-winded video, but a really good one. I love talking about game design. I could talk about it for hours. If you guys want to watch this video, here is the link. Go give Tim Cain a subscription. Give this video a like. And I hope on YouTube that you enjoyed this discussion. So if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ooh, what a video.